Little daughter, dressed in a filthy, tattered pink dress, was holding her 8-month-old baby brother in both arms. Her voice broke with sobs as she pleaded, "Please don't hurt me and my brother anymore." From that very moment, every secret hidden inside the house began to unfold. Samuel Walker sat in his cold office. At 43, he owned and worked from the top floor of Central Park Tower in New York, one of the most luxurious buildings at the heart of the city. On his desk rested a gold-plated pen and a thick stack of files. He signed each page like a machine, the crystal chandelier light glinting off the Rolex on his wrist. The tailored suit fit perfectly across his broad shoulders. The Italian leather shoes gleamed beneath the desk. Everything around him spoke of wealth, success, and power, the very things any American man might dream of. But inside, his heart was hollow. Samuel had once known a happy family. Sarah, his first wife, had been the light of his life. Emily, their first daughter, used to run around the yard with her soft brown hair bouncing in the wind. And now there was Michael, the baby boy only 8 months old, born in the middle of loss. The day Sarah left this world because of hemorrhaging after childbirth, Samuel felt as though his life had been drained away. 8 months had passed, and he had not once sat down to play with Emily, nor had he held Michael in his arms. He buried himself in business trips, paperwork, and numbers, as if running away from memory. During that time, Veronica, his second wife, appeared like an angel. Once Sarah's close friend, she had stepped into the house with a gentle presence, soothing everything broken with her sweet, radiant smile. To Samuel, she was the devoted woman he needed. If Sarah had been light, then Veronica was the salvation of his life. She held both children as if they were her own, caring for them with the tenderness of a model mother. Seeing that, Samuel felt reassured. He thought, at least the children have a woman at home. That is better than growing up with only a cold father. He was always grateful that she carried the burden he had abandoned. Today, after a month away on business, Samuel closed the last file. He stood, catching his reflection in the tall mirror on the wall, his face stern, his eyes weary. Suddenly, a thought crossed his mind. He wanted to go home early without telling anyone. He wanted to bring a small surprise. Maybe Emily would run into his arms. Maybe Michael would smile when he held him close. The thought softened him for the first time in months. Samuel took his coat and walked out quickly before his secretary could ask another question. The luxury car sped along the road leading back to his suburban estate. That house had once been filled with laughter, once warm with life. Now it was a place Samuel rarely touched, stopping only between trips. Today felt different. He wanted to see his family. The iron gates opened and Samuel stepped into the grand hall. Everything was unusually still. The golden glow of the chandelier fell across the marble floor. He set his briefcase down on the table and removed his coat. Then, from somewhere deeper in the house, he heard the faint sound of a child's sobs. Michael. The sound pierced the silence. Samuel froze. Amid the weak cries, another trembling voice followed, small and broken. "Please, don't hurt me and my brother anymore." Samuel's body stiffened. It was Emily. His daughter's voice, choking, pleading. His whole body tensed, his heart seeming to stop. He moved forward slowly, following the hallway, and stopped just out of sight behind the frame of the doorway leading into the living room. The scene before him made it hard to breathe. Emily, 6 years old, her brown hair tangled, her pink dress stained with dirt, sat huddled on the floor, her small arms wrapped tightly around Michael. The baby's face was red, his cries relentless, his tiny hands reaching out and clinging to his sister. Emily bowed her head, her shoulders trembling. Standing across from them was Veronica. She wore a tight red dress, her blonde hair styled perfectly, her face heavily made up. But her voice was nothing like the sweetness she showed Samuel. It was sharp, each word cutting like glass. "Shut up. How many times have I told you, do not bother me? If you don't listen, I will throw both of you out on the street again." Samuel rushed forward, placing himself between Veronica and the children. "Stop." His voice was hoarse but firm. He reached out, trying to take Michael, his movements clumsy after so long without holding his son. "Let me hold him. Emily, come here to Daddy." The girl froze, her fingers gripping the edge of her dress. Samuel hesitated for half a beat, his hand hovering in the air before pulling back, standing protectively in front of them, by instinct alone. A flash of venom crossed Veronica's eyes, sharp as a needle. In an instant, it vanished behind a gentle smile. "You're back? I was just teaching the kids some discipline. They were being too wild." She stepped closer, placing a light hand on the sleeve of Samuel's jacket, her voice softening like honey. "You must be tired after coming home. Don't get so worked up over a moment of childish whining. The doctor said kids need discipline, didn't he? I've been with them all month. I understand their behavior better." Samuel held Michael tightly, his throat burning. He glanced at Emily, saw the panic in her eyes, then back at Veronica's tender smile. She tilted her head, pressing her lips together as if with pity. "Or maybe you just feel guilty for being away too long so everything looks worse than it is? Don't weigh yourself down. Children look at the adults around them." His face flushed red. "Give him to me." Samuel quickly stood, extending his arms, his voice hoarse and urgent. Veronica glanced at him briefly, then handed the boy over. Samuel awkwardly caught him, his arms stiff like wood after so long without holding his son. Emily lifted her head, her eyes filled with both surprise and hope. Samuel adjusted his hold, bringing the boy closer, rocking him gently. Michael kept crying, but his sobs grew less sharp, and Samuel's own breath slowed with each steady pat on the boy's back. "You're safe now. Daddy's here," Samuel whispered. The words left his mouth, and he suddenly realized how long it had been since he last said something like that. Dinner dragged on slowly. Veronica kept starting conversations to fill the silence, bringing up a new investment portfolio, asking Samuel about his business trip, sometimes turning to Emily with a half-hearted question, as if to prove she cared. Mrs. Whitman stood quietly in the corner of the room, her hands clasped together. She did not interrupt once, but when Samuel caught her gaze, he saw in her eyes an unease she could not hide. He was about to call her over, but Veronica had already offered dessert, leaving his question caught in his chest. When the meal ended, Samuel set his napkin on the table and spoke calmly. "I'm going upstairs to change and look over some documents. Emily, make sure you brush your teeth after you finish eating." "Yes, Dad." Emily's reply was faint, her eyes flickering quickly before dimming again. Samuel pushed back his chair, lifted Michael, and handed the boy to Veronica. This time, he noticed her hand more closely, her thumb pressing into the child's side with a practiced reflex. Samuel pressed his lips together and said nothing. He turned away and walked toward the stairs, the wooden steps creaking softly under his feet. At the fourth step, he froze. He had heard the faint clinking of glasses, the scrape of a chair, and then Veronica's voice dropped low, sharp as a blade slicing through silk. "Listen carefully. Remember what I say. If you dare open your mouth to your father, I will throw you and your brother out on the street. I swear it." There was a pause, followed by the sound of quick, shallow breathing, surely Emily's, and then a strangled whisper. "Please, please don't. I'll stay quiet. I won't say a word." Samuel stood paralyzed, his hand gripping the banister until his knuckles turned white. His heart pounded against his ribs as if trying to break free. His mind flashed with the images he had just seen Veronica's shifting voice. Sweet one moment, venomous the next. His daughter's terrified eyes, the bruises on her thin wrists. Michael's cries in arms that were not his own. Downstairs, Veronica's tone shifted again. She gave a thin laugh and spoke louder, just enough for her words to slip through the stairwell. "Good. Finish your food and then I'll give you dessert." Samuel still did not move. Sweat dampened his palms even though his body felt cold. He swallowed hard, but his throat stayed dry, as anger and guilt wrapped around him, squeezing until he could hardly breathe. Mrs. Whitman stepped softly out of the kitchen, her shoes making almost no sound. She paused, her eyes lifting briefly toward the staircase, as if she knew someone was there but dared not look directly. She placed a folded towel on the lower banister, a small, discreet gesture that felt like a message. Samuel bit hard on the inside of his cheek to steady himself. He knew he could not simply walk away as if nothing had happened. Yet he also understood that a single outburst now might frighten those trembling little hands even more. He tightened his grip on the railing, drew in a long breath, and forced the breaking wave inside him back down. And so, He remained there on that step, listening to the pounding of his own heart, the faint clatter of a spoon against a bowl, and the rise of a new and unmistakable command within him, a vow he could not delay even one more day. Samuel's hand still gripped the banister. He inhaled deeply, released it, then returned to the dining table and spoke a short sentence to bring dinner to an end. After that, he went into the study, closed the door, and stood in silence for a long time by the bookshelf. That night he did not sleep, only listening to the small footsteps of his children and the whispers echoing down the hallway like needles piercing skin. When the sky turned pale, he washed his face with cold water, adjusted his collar, and walked straight to the kitchen. Mrs. Whitman was placing dishes onto the wooden shelf. She was the elderly housekeeper who had lived in this home since the time Sarah was a young bride. She was quiet, meticulous, and always kept the proper boundaries. Hearing Samuel's steps, she froze, her thin, dry hands still holding the cloth. "How were the children while I was away?" Samuel asked. His voice was steady, but his eyes could not hide the exhaustion. She hesitated, looked down, then sighed. "Do you want the truth?" Samuel nodded. "I only want the truth." She set the cloth down, speaking slowly so as not to stumble over her emotions. Some nights Miss Veronica made the girls stand on the porch for a long time just for dropping a spoon. One night I found her holding her little brother, sleeping in the storage room because their bedroom was locked. Many times Michael was given only very diluted milk. He cried from hunger until he fell asleep. I tried to intervene, but she told me I had no right to interfere with her way of raising them. Samuel felt his heart clench. The image of Sarah holding a bowl of porridge, lifting Emily onto the chair, smiling as she told a bedtime story came back like a blade cutting through memory. He swallowed, keeping his voice even. "Did you hear her make any threats?" "Yes." Her answer was soft, her eyes still fixed on the cloth. "She said if the girl ever told you, both children would be thrown out. She also threatened to fire me if I ever spoke of it. I truly am sorry, sir. She is far too cunning." Samuel shook his head, resting a hand on the back of a chair to keep it from trembling. "It is not your fault. From now on, if anything happens, you tell me directly. And, if necessary, would you be willing to testify?" She raised her eyes, and in them was a quiet resolve. "For the children, I am willing." That entire day, Samuel moved through the rooms as if inspecting an unfinished worksite. He called his office, postponed every meeting, excusing himself with family matters. He went into the children's room, opened the closet to check blankets, examined the bottles, and took notes in a tight, pressed script. Every small trace was like an accusation. Veronica smiled at him softly, inquiring about his work, but Samuel said little. He told her they would talk later and asked the kitchen to prepare a light dinner. He did not want to cause noise. He wanted to see clearly. The night fell very slowly. In the study, Samuel pushed the files aside until only the small frame of Sarah remained before him. He placed his hand on the wooden surface, an apology lodged in his throat. The desk lamp lit the lines at the corners of his eyes. Outside in the hallway, the wind whistled faintly through the crack of the door. Then came the sound of hesitant steps stopping at the threshold. The door opened slightly. Emily stood there, holding Michael tightly as he dozed, her eyes swollen and red as if she had been crying for a long time. Samuel rose quietly, afraid of shattering the fragile shell wrapping his children. He took Michael into his arms, feeling how light the boy's body was and how uneven his breath came from exhaustion. The faint smell of watered-down milk clung to his collar. He motioned for Emily to sit, pulling a chair so they could be at eye level. But the girl still sat on the edge, her back stiff, her eyes flicking often toward the door. "Dad." The small call was barely a fragment of breath. Then it faded. Samuel nodded, as if to say there was no need to force out more words. He patted Michael's back in an even rhythm, catching the faint gurgle of the boy's stomach. Emily pulled her sleeve down to cover her wrist, her fingertips brushing the frayed hem of her dress, her legs drawing up at times when a distant sound stirred in the hallway. The air in the room was thick with pauses, as if every sentence wanted to rise, but then retreated again. Samuel handed her a cup of warm water. Emily received it with both hands, sipped a tiny swallow, her eyes still fixed on the outline of the doorframe as though expecting someone to walk in. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but stopped himself. afraid that even one misplaced word might make her retreat further. He chose instead a neutral phrase, light as placing a blanket over her shoulders. "Sit here where it's warm." The girl nodded, let out a short breath, then lowered her eyes. As her sleeve slipped back, a purple mark surfaced for a moment, and then vanished like a fish diving into dark water. Samuel saw it but pretended not to, his chest tightening with partial understanding and with the weight of not yet having enough proof to name the rest. Michael drifted into drowsy sleep, his small hand clinging to Samuel's collar as though it were the last anchor he had. Samuel stayed perfectly still, afraid that even the smallest movement might wake the fragile fears trying to lie quiet. "It's safe here." His voice was just above a whisper, its warmth carrying more than the words themselves. Emily gave a faint nod, her lips quivering as though she meant to speak, but then she fell silent. Outside, the wind slipped through the crack of the door in a thin line, rattling the key hook. The girl flinched, her hand curling back in a reflex born of long practice. Samuel reached out, intending to rest a light touch on her wrist as reassurance. Emily recoiled slightly, her chair creaking the softest sound. He froze instantly, his hand suspended in the air, then withdrew it as though from a flame. The silence thickened with another layer. Inside his chest, a question broke loose. When did the distance between father and daughter become this wide? My own child. Is she afraid of even my hand? Samuel stood still for a long time after Emily pulled her hand away. He drew in a deep breath, placed Michael back in the crib, and pulled the blanket over him. Emily sat curled up on the chair, hugging her knees, her eyes still swollen. Samuel bent down, speaking slowly so she could hear him clearly. "Sleep here tonight. I'll be right next to you." Emily nodded, her hands clasped tightly together. Samuel dimmed the light, closed the door to his study, and walked into the empty hallway. The silence of the night seemed to swallow every breath. He could not sleep. Images of Sarah and her warm smile rose again and again out of the darkness. He opened the door to his late wife's old room. A faint fragrance still lingered on the shawl that hung behind the door. Samuel opened the wardrobe and pulled out the small drawer where Sarah used to keep Emily's cards. A thin envelope slipped off the edge of the drawer, caught against the wooden rim. On the front was the handwriting he knew so well. To Samuel. He froze. His hand trembled as he opened the letter. The slanted handwriting seemed like Sarah's voice speaking to him. "If I am no longer here, please protect Emily and Michael. Do not place your trust too quickly in anyone. Believe in your child's eyes. When she is afraid, she will not know how to lie." Samuel sank down onto the floor, the paper quivering with his breath, his mind filled with the sight of Emily clutching her little brother, her dress torn and filthy, her eyes wide with fear. Michael had felt so light in his arms, his breathing broken from hunger and exhaustion. A wave of grief surged through him, no longer a vague sense of guilt, but a sharp, searing ache of fatherly love that tightened his chest. He pressed the letter against his chest, closed his eyes, as if hearing Sarah's voice guiding him word by word. "I am sorry, Sarah. From now on I will protect our children." He opened his eyes, stood, folded the letter carefully, and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket as though sealing a vow. His hand brushed the picture frame on the shelf. From that moment, the decision became simple. He would return to being a father in the truest sense. He held the letter against his chest for a long time, until the hallway light flickered faintly with the wind. When he finally rose, his back ached, but inside him a cord had tightened, pulling him straight forward. The next morning, Samuel woke early. He brewed coffee, listening to Mrs. Whitman's footsteps in the kitchen, the faint clink of a spoon. Veronica appeared soon after, neatly dressed, smiling, as usual. "Did you sleep well? Today I'll take Emily to her music class. Let's have an early dinner tonight." Samuel gave a restrained smile. "I have things to do at home. You keep to your schedule." He said nothing more. All day he remained calm, as if smoothing the last crease on a suit, yet his eyes never left Veronica's movements. By mid-afternoon she received a call, lowering her voice. "All right, 10 minutes, in the back garden." Samuel stood on the porch, a coffee cup in hand. He changed course, circling along the stone path, and stopped behind the row of poplars. The back lawn was still, without wind. A stranger entered through the side gate, a man in his 30s, wearing a dark coat, a thin bag slung over his shoulder. Veronica approached him, her smile no longer the gentle one she wore inside the house. "Right on time, Caleb." The man shook her hand quickly. "I only have 10 minutes. Are you sure about the authorization?" Veronica lowered her voice. "It's a large sum. I want to bring it in early. The trust is under Walker's name. If the signature is transferred, I'll gain control." Caleb glanced around, then pulled out a thin stack of papers. "I need more proof you have the right. The marriage certificate is there, but the proxy signature for the family fund is still missing. Walker isn't a fool." Veronica gave a cold smile. "Don't worry, he's busy playing the perfect father. As for the rest, I'll get it another way." Caleb folded the papers. "No more than 2 weeks. After that, the plan will be harder." "Thank you." Veronica touched his hand with a familiar gesture. "Keep it quiet for me." Samuel stood behind the trees, his heart pounding heavily. He had heard enough to understand where the blade was pointing. It wasn't just the shouting in the kitchen, not just the threats on the stairs. This was a step across another line. Caleb left through the side gate. Veronica lingered a moment, adjusted her hair, then walked back into the house with a calm face. Samuel still didn't move. He opened his phone, the black screen reflecting his own face. 3 tasks lined up in his mind, as straight as ruled lines. Protect the children, preserve the evidence, and call an old friend who knew the law. He went back inside, passing through the living room. Emily was stacking wooden blocks for Michael, glancing now and then toward the kitchen. Her eyes flicked toward him, still carrying some caution, but there was also a small glimmer. Samuel paused for a second, laying his hand gently on his daughter's shoulder. "You're here with me," Emily nodded, her lips forming a faint word. "Yes." Samuel kept walking, his hand gripping Sarah's letter inside his jacket pocket. His heartbeat surged not from fear, but from a late awakening turning into action. He knew what he would have to face, and he understood something else, chilling in its simplicity. She isn't only mistreating my children, she is plotting for the inheritance too. Samuel tightened his grip on the letter in his pocket and walked straight toward the living room. He stopped beside the play rug, bent down to pick up a wooden block that had rolled away, and placed it in Emily's hand. His voice lowered to reassure her. "You stay here with Daddy." Emily gave a slight nod, her eyes darting toward the kitchen, as if to check whether anyone was listening. That night, Samuel stayed in the living room longer than usual. He sat beside them, opened a children's book that Sarah used to read to Emily years ago, and read slowly, letting each word linger. His other hand tapped a steady rhythm on Michael's back until the boy's breathing became calm and even. Every time footsteps passed by, Emily stiffened, her little hand clutching at the hem of her dress, her gaze shifting to the window as if searching for an escape. Seeing this, Samuel whispered, "It's all right. Daddy is here." Veronica passed by once. She smiled faintly and asked as though in passing, "It's late. Let me take the children to their room. They have school tomorrow." Samuel looked up, his tone deliberately calm. "I'll do it." Veronica shrugged and turned away, leaving behind a trace of perfume that could not mask the unease beneath her polished manner. Mrs. Whitman came carrying a warm glass of milk. She placed it on the table by the chair, her eyes glancing at the door before meeting Samuel's, as if to remind him not to let the children out of his sight. Samuel thanked her, urged Emily to take a few sips, then placed Michael in the portable crib, pulling it close beside his chair. He finished the page of the story in a steady, low voice. When the clock struck late, Samuel carried Michael and guided Emily toward the children's bedroom. The door stood ajar, the room tidy but cold. He straightened the blankets, laid the boy in the crib, pulled a small chair close for Emily to sit beside the bed, and spoke slowly. "Daddy is right here. Go to sleep." Emily nodded, but before closing her eyes, she still glanced outside as if waiting for some sound. Samuel dimmed the hallway light, stood at the doorway a while longer, then returned to his study, deciding to move his chair closer to the door so that with one glance he could still see the faint light spilling from the children's room. Near midnight, Samuel lifted his head from the stack of papers when he heard a faint metallic clink at the end of the hallway. He rose quickly, following the sound, his heartbeat racing before he could steady himself. Someone had turned off the hallway light, leaving the space blurred in shadow. Samuel flicked the switch, and the sudden brightness made him squint. In front of the children's room, Emily was sitting hunched on the floor, clutching Michael tightly, the baby hastily wrapped in a thin blanket. Her eyes were red, her cheek pressed against her brother's forehead to keep him warm. The lock on the outside of the door clicked just as it released, and Samuel understood at once. "Who left you out here?" Samuel asked, his voice hoarse with anger, though he managed to restrain it. She locked the room," Emily whispered, each word catching in her throat as her arms tightened protectively around her brother. Samuel knelt, gathered them both, holding Michael firmly against his chest while lifting Emily up with his other arm. "Come with Daddy." He carried the children back to his room, pushed the door until it met the frame, and locked it softly, moving slowly so as not to startle them. Samuel laid Michael in the middle of the bed, propped soft pillows around him, and pulled the blanket to his chest. He slid a chair close for Emily beside the edge of the bed, then poured the rest of the warm milk into a small cup. "Drink a little before you sleep. You're tired already." Emily clutched the cup with both hands, her lips pressed tight to hold back a sob, her eyes fixed on her father's mouth as if waiting for a clear promise. Samuel sat down on the edge of the bed, his hand resting on the blanket covering his daughter's legs. He did not touch her skin for fear she might flinch, but he left the warmth of his hand there like an invisible thread connecting them. "I'm here. Tonight you'll sleep in my room." In the softened glow of the night lamp, Emily looked up, her gaze lingering on the face of the man who had only appeared in brief flashes over the past 8 months between work trips.